Predicting the future is a pretty common phenomenon in our lives. Many of us are certified armchair experts in this field. Most often, we like to predict something bad or very bad, like everyone dying from a flood, fire, war, earthquake, or an evil virus attack. A long time ago, there were world-renowned specialists who could predict things. Now there are too many such professionals, so their names aren't as well known. But many make a good living from it on a smaller scale. You know, they might see a prince on a white horse or incredible wealth. For a fee, they might even tell you how to find this wealth. Usually, no one finds it, but there are still plenty of takers because people are desperate creatures. And who doesn't need a prince on a white horse? Or at least a princess? Hollywood, of course, knows about this love for predictions. So there are quite a few movies about someone discovering this amazing gift and now being hunted or exploited. But for some reason, such films very often flop. If Bruce Willis or Sandra Bullock aren't in them, even Tom Cruise can't save such a movie. Sometimes rather frightening events occur during the filming of these movies, related to the fact that many people, among other things, are also idiots. But they keep making them anyway. Most often, the budgets for such pictures aren't the most impressive, but there are exceptions. Anyway, today we're looking at scary movies about the ability to see something out there, and a happy, talented nephew who thought he could predict the future, but failed miserably. So let's start, perhaps, with the movie Next, based on a story by Philip K. Dick. Truth be told, almost nothing of the original story remained, although initially there were more similarities, and the idea was more about developing the book's concepts and giving the film an even darker tone. Everyone was very angry and wanted to kill someone. Even American Special Services wanted to kill everyone and were the main villains in Next. In an attempt to get Nicolas Cage's character, the government wiped out everyone in their path, from ordinary civilians passing by to the main hero's loved ones. The main hero destroyed all these bad people using his knowledge of the future. When knowledge wasn't enough, he used a spinning kick and the ability to create a massive explosion that sent Las Vegas into space. When this kind of script was pitched to studios, they shied away from it and asked for a complete rewrite. As a result, the special services were toned down and ended up more on the main hero's side, and various organizations, mostly foreign, were made the villains. The main hero's ability to do a spinning kick and blow up Las Vegas was also taken away. All this went on for about 3 years. So, in theory, the film could have been released when Nicolas Cage was a top-tier star, in the early 2000s. But the rewrites and edits made to the script by the talented nephew pushed the start of filming to 2005. At this time, Nicolas Cage's career was in turmoil, and all this led to a budget cut to $70 million. During filming and reshoots, it would inflate to $88 million. For 2007, that's still not a bad budget. Nowadays, it would be $100 to $110 million. Lee Tamahori, who had just epically bombed at the box office with the sequel to XXX, was appointed director. And this fact thrilled everyone so much that he was immediately signed on for Next. They wanted to release the film in 2006, but it didn't work out. After test screenings, Sony Pictures demanded reshoots. It's unknown how serious they were, but Sony, underwhelmed by them, immediately backed out of distributing the film. They managed to find Paramount Pictures. But postponing the premiere for a whole year and the studio's clear reluctance to invest much money in promotional support had already signed Next's death warrant. Besides, Nicolas Cage's career was already in worse shape by 2007. In 2006, The Wicker Man had been released, for which the actor was showered with Razzies, and its failure is generally considered a turning point in his career. Next hit theaters in April 2007. It managed to gross only $18 million domestically. The rest of the world added another $59 million. Critics, naturally, riding the wave from The Wicker Man, quickly trashed the film. It has only 28% positive reviews. Audiences were slightly kinder to the film, but without much enthusiasm. Director Lee Tamahori's career ended instantly. He had once directed films like The Edge and Die Another Day. Nicolas Cage was sliding downhill more slowly, grasping at straws. But the failure of Next hit him hard too. The 1928 film Noah's Ark is mostly known not for its gigantic budget for those times, exceeding $1 million, and its subsequent box office failure. It's all about one of the most horrific tragedies during the film's production. A $1 million budget back then is like a $200 million budget for a film today. For Warner Brothers Studios in those years, it was its most expensive film. Too much time has passed, and back then there wasn't as much information about expenses, so different sources use different figures. They range from $1 to $2 million. The plot of the film is probably familiar to everyone. It actually has two parallel storylines. One thread connects the biblical ark and the Great Flood, while the second is set in modern times, or rather modern for the early last century when the movie was made. Here we have American playboys and German women who need rescuing, escaped convicts, Russian spies, and even Frenchmen just walking by. And almost everyone is silent, as was fashionable back then. When the movie reached theaters, it turned out that talking in films was now possible. So a couple of dialogue scenes were added to the picture. Although the film had many expensive episodes for its time, The Flood was considered the most complex and epic. The film was directed by Michael Curtiz. He is most often blamed for what happened, because later filming was supervised by Daryl Zanuck, and the dialogue scenes were shot by Roy Del Ruth. But for films of that era, having a whole team of directors was not uncommon. For the flood scene, huge sets were built with various drains for the water to flow down, and in certain places, to hit the running extras. Plus, they planned to unleash a massive water tank on them to make it really spectacular. According to some sources, the tank held 600,000 gallons of water, while others say more than 1 million. In liters, that's from 2 to 4 million. The total volume of water is compared to 1 or 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools. In short, they filmed the flood on a grand scale. The largest tank was placed on top of the set, and 2,000 extras were herded underneath, among whom was one of the later most famous American actors, John Wayne. At the signal, they were all supposed to rush towards the mountain and temple, from which torrents of water would flow. Before filming this scene began, the film's cinematographer, Hal Moore, suspected something was amiss. He asked the director about the safety measures that the studio had taken. The talented director suggested he not bother his head with such nonsense, and informed him that risk was a noble endeavor. Moore did not approve of this approach to filming and began to protest, after which he received a legendary kick in the rear and became unemployed. He was replaced by Barney Barry McGill, who agreed that risk was a great thing, especially when someone else was taking it. As a result, 3 million liters of water were dumped on 2,000 people. Some of the extras who weren't in the center got off with a scare. The rest were less fortunate. 3 people drowned. Unofficially, 3 times as many. A couple of people had to have various, now not so necessary, body parts amputated after the incident. About 20 more people suffered various fractures. 40 ambulances were rushed to the set. Even the lead actress nearly drowned and subsequently developed pneumonia. All this drama spread slowly in those years, so part of the film episodes even made it into the first version of the film, which was shown only once at the premiere. Back then, the film ran for over 2.5 hours. When the uproar started, the scenes were cut, and the film was trimmed by 20 minutes. Now, even the theatrical version is considered lost. It ran for about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Nowadays, one can only find a version that is 1 hour and 45 minutes long. It was re-released many years later. Due to the failure and the surrounding scandal, the studio wasn't particularly concerned about preserving the film print of such a movie. So many epic shots from that flood scene didn't survive to our days. Because of the drama on the set of Noah's Ark, various safety regulations were introduced that had to be observed on the sets of all Hollywood films. Later, These rules became more and more numerous. Nowadays, they wouldn't even let you shoot such a movie with stunt performers. And so Noah's Ark grossed $2 million on a budget of $1 to $2 million. This is one of those films about great predictors where the famous American captain, Chris Evans, seemed determined to bury his career. After his stint as the Human Torch in Fantastic Four ended, Evans started bombing with one project after another. Push and The Losers could have been a death sentence for him, but he was saved by that very same Captain America role, which he practically took for peanuts at the time. The plot centers on a specialist in predictions who is hunted by bad guys, a highly original concept for this genre, of course. The film was directed by Paul McGuigan, who is responsible for Lucky Number 11 and Wicker Park, the one with Josh Hartnett. By 2009, Josh Hartnett's star had faded, so they had to cast Chris Evans. Initially, they wanted Channing Tatum, but after circling the project for a while, he found something more interesting and bailed. Push was conceived as a franchise, much like X-Men. It also featured many specialists with various tricks, and the film's failure is usually attributed to the director. He tried to shift the focus from the action component to the characters, stating that action wasn't what he wanted to see in such a film. Why the producers listened to him remains a mystery. However, the director did significantly help in reducing the film's budget. This is one of the last films to extensively use guerrilla filmmaking techniques. They shot in Hong Kong, which is probably why the filmmakers didn't get into too much trouble. They might have wanted to catch them in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is far away. The director explained his methods by saying there were too many people, and their attempts to film officially on such streets had failed. So, much of what was shot from vans, special boxes, or they would simply jump out of cars, film the actors walking, and just as someone was about to confront them, they'd quickly jump back into the cars and vanish. Although test screenings for the film were terrible, they didn't bother to fix Push, and just dumped it into theaters in February 2009. It faced a crowded field of smaller films like The Pink Panther 2, Taken, Coraline, and He's Just Not That Into You. In this melee, Push turned out to be the film audiences wanted least. Critics, naturally, savaged the film, so its chances were slim. It grossed only $48 million on a $38 million budget. After the film's failure, director Paul McGuigan's career continued mainly in television series. As for Chris Evans, as we've already noted, he was saved by Marvel Studios and now commands $10 to $15 million for his roles in streaming service projects. And now, let's look at one of the most severe box office flops of the early 90s, Jacob's Ladder. This film, directed by Adrian Lyne, stars Tim Robbins as a man who, after taking too many military experimental drugs, starts seeing disturbing things, leading to everyone around him getting killed. The film officially cost $25 million in 1990. Today, considering inflation and other factors, the budget for such a film would easily exceed $100 million. Bruce Joel Rubin wrote the screenplay in the early 80s. He is best known for writing Ghost. With the script in hand, he shopped it around to various studios but couldn't find any takers. Those who liked it believed it had absolutely no box office potential. Only independent studios specializing in B-movies were willing to consider the script, but Rubin refused to sell his work to them. Director Ridley Scott also showed interest in the project. However, his career wasn't at its peak then, and he couldn't secure funding for such a project himself. Everything changed in the mid-80s, when Rubin's script landed on the blacklist of unproduced screenplays. Major studios immediately became interested. After a bit of a tussle, Paramount Pictures picked up the script. They also acquired Rubin's script for Ghost. However, a few months later, the studio's management got cold feet. The cancellation of Jacob's Ladder is often attributed to a change in the studio head, who began rejecting projects he deemed too risky. Another version suggests the issue was the film's ending, which the studio demanded be changed. However, the director and screenwriter flatly refused. Jacob's Ladder might never have been made if not for the heyday of Carolco Pictures, a studio known for throwing money at almost anything it saw. Carolco allocated $25 million for the film and gave full creative control to director Adrian Lyne. For this opportunity, Lyne turned down directing The Bonfire of the Vanities, which he had been considering after Paramount dropped Jacob's Ladder. Interestingly, although Paramount Pictures abandoned the film, the U.S. rights still belonged to them. After Carolco's bankruptcy, some rights to its assets went to World Vision Enterprises, which was later acquired by Paramount. Mickey Rourke was initially expected to play the lead role. Adrian Lyne had previously directed Rourke in 9.5 Weeks. By then, Rourke was notoriously erratic and would only agree to act for large sums of money in films he often found distasteful. So, after some consideration, he turned down Jacob's Ladder. Funnily enough, after Rourke, the offer went to Don Johnson, who also declined, choosing instead to star with Mickey Rourke in Harley-Davidson and the Marlboro Man. That film also flopped, but they got paid more for their failure. With Jacob's Ladder, there was only a minor conflict between the director and Carolco. They wanted big-name actors for the lead roles, leading them to pursue Al Pacino and Madonna, but both also declined. The studio eventually relented, and Tim Robbins and Elizabeth Pena were cast in the lead roles. The film's failure is sometimes blamed on them, being perceived as actors nobody wanted. Tim Robbins, however, believes the film's severe flop was due to its themes related to Vietnam and its overall anti-war stance. At the time, there was a surge of patriotism in the country linked to the impending Gulf War, and nobody wanted to see such a film. Consequently, the advertising campaign tended to irritate both the general public and influential figures. Like many of Carolco films, Jacob's Ladder has varying reported budgets. The studio's accounting was, shall we say, creative, with many expenses funneled through Uncle Carolco's companies and various John Smiths, whom few ever actually saw. So, online, you can find film budget figures not only of $25 million, but also $35 million and even $40 million. How much was actually spent, we will likely never know. They still can't agree on the final budget for Terminator 2, and for a film like Jacob's Ladder, hardly anyone cares about the exact figure. The film also suffered during test screenings. Audiences reportedly cried and called for their mothers. Many scenes were deemed too harsh for theatrical release and were cut. Adrian Lyne mentioned that the film was shortened by more than 20 minutes. Later, some of the deleted scenes were restored for the video release. The film was released in theaters in November 1990. Both critics and audiences liked it, but nobody went to see it in cinemas. Although the film did manage to gross $26 million, it's considered one of the films that contributed to Carolco's downfall. Yes, audiences often come to like these kinds of films, but usually much later. However, its failure didn't damage anyone's career. Lyne went on to direct the box office hit Indecent Proposal, and Robbins revived his career with The Player, for which he won a Golden Globe. The film Deja Vu, directed by Tony Scott, was also supposed to reach theaters much earlier. Work on it was halted after September 11, 2001. At that time, it was felt that such a plot might not resonate with audiences. The film features Denzel Washington jumping between the past and future as he tries to prevent a ferry explosion. The screenplay was written by Bill Marsili and Terry Rossio. By then, Rossio already had The Mask of Zorro, Shrek, and Pirates of the Caribbean to his name, so all of Hollywood's major studios were vying for their script. Producer Jerry Bruckheimer had to part with $5 million to secure it, a record sum for a screenplay at the time. Bruckheimer then brought director Tony Scott and Denzel Washington on board. Washington, upon learning Tony Scott was set to direct, quickly agreed. However, after reviewing the script again, Tony Scott left the project, stating that he found nothing interesting in it for him. Denzel Washington then took charge of the script, working with the screenwriters to revise various elements that he found unsatisfactory. Once Denzel was pleased with the changes, he persuaded Tony Scott to return, assuring him that everything was now in order and the film held plenty of interest for a director. However, when Tony Scott returned and reread the script, he informed Denzel that there must have been some mistake, as he still found nothing engaging in it. Denzel Washington had to pressure the producers and the studio to allow Tony Scott and his screenwriters to polish the script further. This was granted, but only after Tony Scott solemnly promised he wouldn't abandon the film again. The original script was more of a sci-fi melodrama. The plot didn't center on an explosion, but on a dying woman around whom Denzel Washington's character was frantically trying to help. Some of this remained in the film, but the focus was significantly shifted, and the movie ended up not being about love. This was likely the aspect that greatly dissatisfied the director. Subsequently, Scott and Washington clashed over the filming location. Denzel wanted to shoot in New York, while Scott insisted on New Orleans. Denzel flatly refused, as the city had just been devastated by Hurricane Katrina. Ironically, he was convinced by the very same hurricane. It was proposed that the film would provide jobs for the city and generally help the residents in their difficult situation, casting Denzel in a noble, almost savior-like role. This arrangement appealed to the actor, and swayed by the prospect of such a portrayal, he conceded. All the actors and the director were brought to New Orleans just before filming, where they publicly spoke about their desire to help revitalize the city by shooting their expensive blockbuster there. This was widely publicized in the media, further endearing Denzel to the American public. New Orleans even provided the filmmakers with a real, operational ferry for the shoot, which they were permitted to blow up, provided they promised it wouldn't sink and wouldn't sustain overly severe damage. Along with the ferry, they also blew up the father of the second unit cinematographer, Michael Endler. Endler's father, a special effects specialist, had died of natural causes during the filming of Deja Vu. Endler approached Tony Scott with the request to include his father's ashes in the ferry explosion, as his father had wished for something similar to be done with his remains. Scott and many crew members had worked with Endler's father previously and readily agreed. Thus, Endler's father was detonated along with the ferry. As for the ferry itself, the outcome was better than anticipated. The exploded ferry was repaired without issue and returned to service after filming concluded. It was reported that the careful work of the special effects team in placing the charges minimized the damage. When the film was shown to test audiences, they were not enthusiastic. Screenwriter Terry Rossio was particularly disappointed. He asserted that Tony Scott's changes had introduced logical inconsistencies into the film that were absent in the original script, where he had dedicated more time to explaining the mechanics of time travel and the jumps themselves. Scott, however, had cut much of this material, focusing instead on the action. The screenwriter was so disheartened by that, by his own account, he never watched the final version of the film. Later, Tony Scott would concur, admitting he had made a flawed movie by trying to steer it in the wrong direction. However, he also attributed blame to the compressed production schedule, stating that the studio's constant demands to shoot faster left him with no time to think things through properly. Over $75 million was spent on the film, the figure usually cited as its budget. At the time, New Orleans offered 25% tax incentives, meaning a portion of the costs was reimbursed to the filmmakers. The sometimes mentioned budget figure of $100 million likely arose from this context. Additionally, the U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Navy provided assistance to the filmmakers free of charge. Therefore, the actual budget could have been even higher than $100 million if they had had to pay for these military services. The film was released in late November 2006, competing with Casino Royale. It managed to gross $180 million on its $75 million budget. Not a spectacular result, but considering Denzel Washington was the king of DVD, the studio probably recouped its minor losses fairly quickly. However, had it not been for the tax breaks, and had the film been shot in New York as Denzel initially wanted, The financial failure could have been far more substantial.